How has your day been so far? Hello, we're AETA Stories, and today we're sharing a brand new original story with you.
Laura Bennett finished the last line in the electronic chart and sat back for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if they no longer remembered what rest felt like. 24 hours in the ICU had blurred into a single, relentless stretch of alarms. Voices and fluorescent light. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes burned. The coffee she had poured hours earlier had gone untouched and cold. The shift had been overwhelmed almost from the start. A massive apartment fire on the east side of Sacramento had sent wave after wave of patients into the trauma unit. Smoke inhalation, burns, fractures from panicked escapes down stairwells. Beds filled faster than they could be cleared. Laura moved from room to room on instinct, checking ventilator settings, titrating drips, documenting vitals with the steady precision that had become second nature over the years. There was no time to think, only to act. By the time the worst of the fire victims were stabilized, the unit should have quieted. It rarely did, just as the monitors settled into a more predictable rhythm. The double doors burst open again. Paramedics rushed in with a child on a gurney, her small body dwarfed by straps and equipment. An 8-year-old girl, struck by a city bus at an intersection near a school. Her name was Abigail Dawson. Laura helped transfer the child to the ICU bed, her movements careful and practiced. Blood matted the girl's light hair, dried in places, fresh in others. The trauma physician called out orders while the respiratory therapist adjusted the airway. Imaging results came back quickly, grim but not hopeless. After a brief, urgent discussion, the decision was made to place Abigail under medically induced sedation to reduce swelling and spare her the worst of the pain. As medications were prepared, Laura noticed a woman standing rigidly just outside the bay, her hands pressed to the glass. Patricia Dawson, the girl's mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and frantic as she watched strangers surround her child. When the physician explained the plan, Patricia's composure shattered. She fired questions through sobs, her voice breaking with every sentence. Why was sedation necessary? How long would it last? Was it dangerous? Would her daughter wake up? When the physician was called away to another emergency, Laura remained. She pulled a chair closer to Patricia and spoke quietly without rushing. She explained what the sedation would do and what it would not. She explained the risks honestly, without alarm, and the purpose behind every step. She spoke the way she always did, with clarity, patience, and respect, never talking down, never hiding behind medical jargon. Patricia listened, clinging to every word as if it were a lifeline. When she asked if she could stay, just for a while, Laura hesitated only briefly. ICU policy was strict, especially after a mass casualty event. But she looked at the woman's shaking hands and the unconscious child in the bed and made a choice. "All right," Laura said softly. "You can stay. Just please keep quiet and let us work." She dimmed the lights in the bay, checked the monitors one more time, and made space for a mother who needed to be close to her child. It was a small act, barely noticeable in the chaos of the unit, but it was who Laura Bennett was. Exhausted, compassionate, and steady, even when no one was watching. The morning handoff blurred past Laura Bennett in fragments. Voices overlapped at the nurse's station. Lab values were recited, beds reassigned, charts signed off. She stood with a pen in her hand, nodding at the right moments, forcing her attention to stay anchored to the words being spoken. Fatigue pressed down on her like weight. At least twice she had to blink hard, steadying herself before the details slipped away. When it was finally over, Laura walked to a quieter corner of the unit and pulled her phone from her pocket. She checked the time and winced. Mark would already be getting Evan ready. She called anyway. He answered on the second ring. His voice was brisk, distracted, as if he were already juggling several things at once. Laura closed her eyes for a second and leaned against the wall. "Don't forget today's performance," she said. "Evan's costume is hanging in the closet, the blue one. Shoes are on the bottom shelf." "Yes, yes, I know," Mark replied. "We're on it." In the background, she could hear the clatter of dishes and the faint sound of a television. Then Evan's voice broke through, clearer and sharper than anything else that morning. "Mom, are you coming this time?" Laura swallowed. She pictured her son in the kitchen, hair still messy from sleep, eyes hopeful despite experience. She chose her words carefully. "I just got off a long shift," she said gently. "I'll try, sweetheart, but I might need to sleep first." There was a pause. Evan didn't answer right away. "Everyone else's parents come," he said finally, the disappointment unmistakable. "You always have work." Mark stepped in before Laura could respond. "Buddy, your mom saves lives," he said, half joking. "Someone has to do it." The words were meant to sound generous, but Laura heard what lay beneath them. Mark continued, his tone sharpening just enough to sting. "This is the job you chose," he added. "It's not exactly 9 to 5. You can't expect things to stop just because there's a school event." Laura said nothing. She knew this conversation. She had lived it for years. Every missed dinner, every cancelled weekend, every promise made with the unspoken understanding that it might be broken. "I'll see what I can do," she said quietly and meant it, even though she already knew the odds. Evan murmured something she couldn't quite hear. Mark said they had to go. The call ended without ceremony. Laura lowered the phone and stood there for a moment longer, listening to the hum of the hospital waking fully into morning. She felt the familiar guilt settle into place. Not sharp enough to draw blood, just constant. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. There were patients waiting, charts to finish, responsibility pulling her forward. She straightened, took a breath, and went back to work, carrying the cost with her as she always did. Laura Bennett unlocked the front door and stepped inside with only one thought in mind: sleep. She did not bother turning on most of the lights. Her shoes came off near the door, her bag slid to the floor, and she moved through the house on autopilot, already imagining the relief of sinking into bed without showering, without thinking. As she passed the kitchen, a soft chime broke the silence. Laura stopped. The sound came again. Clear this time. A phone notification. She frowned slightly and turned back. Mark's phone lay face up on the kitchen table, screen lighting the dim room. He never forgot it. Not for work. Not for anything. She hesitated, then told herself it was probably nothing. A work alert. A calendar reminder. Something urgent he would want to see. She reached for the phone just as it chimed again. A message preview appeared across the screen. From Catherine Langford. Laura's fingers tightened around the device. Catherine was Mark's superior, a senior administrator at the hospital. Laura had heard her name often enough, usually accompanied by complaints about late meetings and unreasonable demands. What she had never heard was this tone. The message was brief but unmistakable. "Are you forgetting that I'm waiting? It's cold out here. You promised you'd pick me up. Don't make me regret trusting you." There was nothing overtly explicit in the words, nothing that could be pointed to as proof. And yet the familiarity, the expectation, the subtle intimacy pressed in on Laura's chest. This was not how a supervisor spoke to an employee. She did not sit down. She did not reread the message over and over. She simply stood there, letting the meaning settle slowly, heavily, as if her mind were protecting her by refusing to react too quickly. The phone began to vibrate in her hand. Incoming call. Catherine Langford. Laura stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary. Then she answered. "Yes," she said calmly. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed immediately by irritation. "Mark, where are you?" "I've been waiting for... This is Laura Bennett," Laura said. Her voice even. "Mark's wife." Silence fell, thick and deliberate. "Oh," Catherine said at last. The word came out clipped, stripped of warmth. I see. Laura waited. My car has been in service since yesterday, Catherine continued, her tone now cool and controlled. Mark agreed to drive me to work this morning. Apparently, he forgot his phone. I see, Laura repeated. Another pause. Well, Catherine said, I'll take a rideshare instead. Please tell your husband not to make commitments he can't keep. The line went dead. Laura lowered the phone slowly and set it back on the table, exactly where she had found it. She stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside. Everything in the house looked the same. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. She told herself it could be explained. A broken car, a favor between colleagues, poor boundaries perhaps, but nothing more. Mark was careless, forgetful. He always had been. Still, the word trusting echoed in her mind. Laura turned away from the kitchen and walked toward the bedroom. She showered, crawled into bed, and closed her eyes. Exhaustion weighed on her body, but sleep did not come easily. Beneath the fatigue, something restless had taken root. No matter how carefully she arranged the facts, no matter how much she tried to reason them into harmless shapes, her instincts refused to quiet, and Laura Bennett had learned, over years in the ICU, that instincts were rarely wrong. Laura Bennett had just finished reviewing overnight labs when a message appeared in her inbox requesting that she report to Dr. Stephen Harris's office. The tone was formal, impersonal, no explanation. That alone tightened something in her chest. Dr. Harris was waiting when she arrived, standing behind his desk with his arms crossed. As head of the ICU, he was not a man given to unnecessary conversation. He gestured for her to sit, but did not soften his expression. We have a problem, he said without preamble. Laura straightened in the chair. What kind of problem? Dr. Harris turned his monitor toward her. Medication records from your last shift. Controlled substances. Several ampoules are missing from the log. Laura leaned forward, scanning the screen. Her breath caught. That can't be right. They're not accounted for, he continued evenly, and the corresponding disposal containers were not logged or located. For a moment, she could not find her voice. Controlled medications were tracked obsessively. Every dose documented. Every vial disposed of under protocol. Laura had built her career on precision, on never cutting corners, no matter how exhausted she was. I follow procedure, she said finally. Every time. I don't make mistakes like that. Dr. Harris studied her face. I'm not accusing you of intent, but the discrepancy exists. Laura shook her head, the denial instinctive. I would remember. I always double-check. Memory isn't evidence, he replied. The records are incomplete, and that puts the unit at risk. The words settled like ice in her stomach. Risk meant audits, investigations, suspensions. She had seen careers unravel over far less. I need time, Laura said, her voice unsteady despite her effort to control it. There has to be an explanation. You have 1 week, Dr. Harris said. Find the documentation, locate the containers, or identify where the breakdown occurred. And if I can't, she asked quietly. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his tone had hardened. Then we proceed accordingly. Laura left his office in a daze. The hallway felt longer than usual, the sounds of the unit distorted, distant. She replayed the shift in her mind, step by step. The fire victims, the constant interruptions, the child brought in near the end, the endless charting, and then she remembered it. The moment her eyes had closed, just briefly, as she sat at the computer entering medication data. The way her head had dipped forward before she jerked awake, heart pounding, embarrassed even though no one had noticed. Had it been longer than she thought? The possibility crept in despite her resistance, unsettling her confidence. She had never doubted her competence before. Now the ground beneath her felt unstable, as if something she trusted implicitly had been quietly pulled away. For the first time in her professional life, Laura Bennett walked back onto the ICU floor feeling exposed, afraid and unsure of where the truth would lead. Catherine Langford did not tolerate resistance well. She stood in her office long after most of the administrative floor had emptied, the city lights of Sacramento glowing beyond the glass. Her phone lay on the desk, dark and silent, its stillness and irritation in itself. Mark Bennett had promised clarity. Instead, he had given her hesitation. When he finally arrived that evening, Catherine wasted no time. She spoke with the same confidence she used in board meetings, as if the outcome were already decided. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "You need to end it. Cleanly." Mark did not sit. He remained near the door, his posture tense. "I can't," he replied. "Not like that." Catherine's mouth tightened. "Why not?" "My son," he said. "I'm not walking away from him." She waved the concern aside. "Children adapt. Laura will manage. She always does." Mark shook his head. "You don't understand. Evan needs his mother, and I'm not going to take him away from her." For the first time, Catherine felt anger sharpen into something colder. "You're choosing inconvenience over opportunity," she said. "Over us." "I'm choosing my child," Mark answered. That was when Catherine understood. Persuasion would not work. Pressure might. The following day, she met with her attorney. The conversation was brief, efficient, and entirely transactional. Custody law was not Catherine's field, but she learned quickly. Courts favored stability. Employment mattered. An unemployed parent entered proceedings at a disadvantage, no matter how devoted. By the end of the meeting, the solution had taken shape with chilling clarity. Laura Bennett had to lose her job. Catherine did not act recklessly. She never did. She made a few calls, framed as favors rather than orders. A vacancy was quietly created in the ICU. Her niece, Madison Langford, newly credentialed and eager, was placed into the unit under the guise of expanding coverage after the apartment fire. Madison understood exactly what was expected of her. She watched Laura closely from the start, noting the long hours, the skipped breaks, the way exhaustion dulled even the sharpest focus. She learned the rhythm of Laura's shifts, the moments when documentation piled up faster than it could be completed. She memorized procedures, not to follow them, but to bend them just enough. The first time Madison altered a record, her hands barely trembled. A missing timestamp, a delayed entry, nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced to her directly. She worked quickly and quietly, always when Laura was elsewhere, always when oversight was thin. Later came the physical evidence. Waste containers temporarily removed, relocated, then gone. Pages slipped from logs with practiced speed and hidden away. Each action was small on its own, insignificant enough to escape notice. Together, they formed a pattern designed to surface only when it was too late. Madison timed everything carefully. She knew Laura was most vulnerable at the end of a grueling shift, when fatigue blurred the edges of memory and doubt could be planted easily. Catherine monitored progress from a distance, never intervening directly. She did not need to. The system, once nudged, would do the rest. By the time questions were raised, the damage would already be done. And Laura Bennett, still unaware of the forces moving against her, continued to work with the same quiet dedication, never suspecting that her professionalism had been turned into the very weapon used to destroy her. Laura Bennett knew something was wrong the moment she stepped inside the house. The air felt unsettled, stripped of its ordinary quiet. A suitcase stood open in the hallway, clothes folded with unfamiliar care. Mark's shoes were gone from their usual place by the door. For a second, Laura wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on her again, if she had misread the scene the way she had begun to misread everything lately. Then Mark walked out of the bedroom, carrying another armful of clothes. "What's going on?" she asked, though the answer was already pressing in on her from every direction. He did not stop packing. "I'm leaving," he said, as if announcing a change in plans rather than the end of a marriage. Laura stared at him. "Leaving where?" "With Catherine," he replied. He finally looked at her then, his expression oddly relieved. "We make more sense together." The words landed without drama, without apology. Laura felt them pass through her, cold and unreal. "You're serious," she said. "Yes." He exhaled as if unburdened. "I should have done this sooner." Her mind searched for footing. "And Evan?" "He'll be fine," Mark said. "He'll adjust." Something inside her fractured. "You're talking about our son." "I'm talking about reality," he snapped, irritation breaking through. "Your job consumes you. Laura, you disappear for days. You come home exhausted, barely present. This," he gestured around the room, "isn't a life." She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. He continued, emboldened by her silence. "Catherine understands ambition. She has resources, influence. She doesn't come home smelling like antiseptic and collapse on the couch." Laura felt heat rush to her face. "I save lives," she said quietly. "And I'm tired of living in the shadow of your shifts," he replied. "Catherine has real power. She's respected. She looks incredible. With her, I don't have to apologize for wanting more." The room seemed to tilt. Shock gave way to grief, and grief ignited into something sharp and uncontrollable. "Get out," Laura said, her voice rising. "Get your things and go." Mark did not argue. He zipped the suitcase, lifted it, and walked past her without looking back. The door closed behind him with a dull, final sound. Laura stood there long after he was gone, her hands clenched at her sides, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She did not cry at first. She sank slowly to the floor, pressed her palms against her face, and tried to breathe. When she finally checked the time, panic surged. Evan should have been home. She grabbed her phone and called the school. The answer came too easily. "His father picked him up," the administrator said. "We assumed you were aware." Laura's vision blurred. She called Mark again and again. When he finally answered, his tone was infuriatingly calm. "Relax," he said. "Evan's fine." "Where is my son?" she demanded. "With me," Mark replied. "We're at Catherine's place. He loves it here. There's a pond, a huge yard, a hammock. He's laughing." The image was unbearable. "Bring him home," Laura said. "Why?" Mark asked. "He's happy. And honestly, Laura, this is probably better. Stability. Structure. You're barely holding things together." The call ended before she could respond. Laura lowered the phone slowly. The house felt cavernous now, stripped of warmth and sound. In a matter of hours, she had lost her husband, her sense of safety, and her child's presence. Everything she had balanced for years, work, marriage, motherhood, had collapsed at once. She sat alone on the living room floor as night settled outside, the weight of it pressing in. For the first time, Laura Bennett understood what it meant to truly have nothing to hold on to. The envelope arrived 2 days later. Laura Bennett stood at the kitchen counter, staring at her name printed neatly across the front, the return address unmistakable. Family Court. She already knew what it contained before she opened it. Still, her hands trembled as she slid the papers free. A petition for divorce, filed by Mark. Formal, efficient, stripped of any trace of the life they had once shared. Dates, legal language, requests outlined with clinical precision. She read it once, then again, the words blurring together until they no longer felt real. She had barely set the documents down when her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital administration. A meeting request. Mandatory. Immediate. Laura arrived at the ICU administrator's office with a familiar knot in her stomach. one that tightened further when she saw Dr. Stephen Harris waiting inside. His posture was rigid, his expression closed. There was no chair offered this time. "I'll get straight to it," he said. The medication discrepancy was reviewed. Laura's heart pounded. "And we're proceeding with termination," Dr. Harris replied. "Effective immediately." The room seemed to hollow out around her. "You said I had a week." "The decision was escalated," he said flatly. "This no longer sits at my level." Laura felt heat rush to her face. "I didn't do this. You know I didn't." Dr. Harris looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. Some of the tension drained from his shoulders. "Off the record," he said, lowering his voice, "I don't think you did." Her breath caught. "Then why is this happening?" "Because someone above both of us wants it to," he answered. "And when administration wants something, it happens." Laura swallowed hard. "Who?" Dr. Harris hesitated, then met her eyes. "Your husband's mistress," he said bluntly. "You should thank her. She's well connected." The words struck with more force than any accusation could have. Laura felt exposed, reduced to a problem that had been managed and discarded. "This is retaliation," she said. "You can't fire me without proof." "We're not firing you for cause," Dr. Harris replied. "You'll be allowed to resign." "So I'm guilty either way," Laura said quietly. "If this becomes a formal investigation," he continued, "you risk charges that could follow you for the rest of your career. This is the cleanest option available to you." Laura looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She thought of the years she had spent in that hospital, the nights she had slept in break rooms, the holidays she had missed, the patients she had stayed with long after her shift officially ended. "I want this noted," she said, "that I deny everything." "You can submit a statement," Dr. Harris said, "but without evidence, it won't change the outcome." There was nothing left to argue. No appeal, no witness, no proof. The system had already closed around her. Laura signed the resignation papers in silence. When she left the office, her badge no longer granted her access to the unit. The doors that had once opened automatically now remained sealed. She walked down the corridor for the last time, her footsteps echoing softly. The humiliation settled deep, heavier than anger. She had done everything right and still lost. For the first time, Laura Bennett understood just how small an individual could be inside a system that had already decided her fate. Laura Bennett returned to the ICU late that afternoon. Long after her resignation papers had been signed and her access badge deactivated, she moved through the unit as a visitor now, slower, more carefully, as if the walls themselves might reject her. The familiar sounds of monitors and ventilators followed her down the corridor, unchanged and different. Abigail Dawson lay in the same bed, small and still, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The sedation held. The room was dim, peaceful in a way that felt almost unreal after everything Laura had just lost. Patricia Dawson stood at the bedside. When she turned and saw Laura, her expression shifted instantly. "Something's wrong," Patricia said softly. "I can see it on your face." Laura tried to smile. It did not hold. She stepped closer to the bed, adjusted a setting out of habit, then let her hands fall to her sides. "I was let go today," she said. The words sounded flat, stripped of emotion by repetition. "They say I mishandled medication records." Patricia frowned. "You? That makes no sense." Laura hesitated, then shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I don't have proof. And now," she stopped herself, swallowing hard. "Now my husband has taken my son." Patricia pulled out a chair and gestured for Laura to sit. She waited, patient and attentive, while the whole story came out in broken pieces. The messages, the affair, the missing records, the resignation that was not really a choice at all. When Laura finished, the room was silent for a long moment. You're not lying, Patricia said at last. I know you're not. Laura let out a short, humorless breath. Knowing isn't enough. Patricia reached into her bag and removed a folder. She placed it carefully on the small table beside the bed. When one of the nurses forced me out of this room during your off shift, I went to administration, she said. I requested written permission to remain with my daughter. Our company sponsors this hospital. They couldn't refuse. She opened the folder and slid out a document, stamped and signed. And while I was at it, Patricia continued calmly, I asked for permission to install security cameras in this bay. For my own peace of mind. Laura's heart began to pound. Cameras. Patricia nodded and took out her phone. She tapped the screen and turned it toward Laura. The footage was unmistakable. Madison Langford appeared on the screen, moving quickly, deliberately. She tore pages from a logbook, folded them, slipped them into her pocket. In another clip, she entered the medication room and removed a waste container, glancing over her shoulder before leaving. Laura stared, unable to speak. I can testify, Patricia said. I can provide this to the court, to the hospital, to anyone who needs to see it. Laura closed her eyes. Relief surged first, sharp and overwhelming. Then something else followed, quieter but firmer. No, she said. Patricia looked at her in surprise. Laura, this could clear your name. I know, Laura replied, but I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want my son back. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. She hesitated, then continued. Abigail will be discharged soon. She'll need constant care at home. A trained medical caregiver. I'd like to offer you the position. Laura opened her eyes. You trust me. Patricia smiled faintly. With my daughter's life. Laura looked at Abigail, then back at her mother. For the first time in days, the weight on her chest eased. She did not feel victorious. She felt steady. And for now, that was enough. The transition to the Dawson estate happened quietly, without ceremony. Laura Bennett arrived with a single suitcase, medical supplies neatly packed, and Evan's small backpack slung over her shoulder. The house sat beyond the city, surrounded by tall trees and open space, far removed from the constant noise of the hospital. For the first time in weeks, Laura felt as though she could breathe. Abigail's recovery was slow, measured in small victories rather than dramatic turns. At first, she slept more than she woke. When she did open her eyes, confusion clouded her expression, and fear followed quickly. Laura stayed close, speaking softly, explaining each step before she touched her, allowing the child to regain trust at her own pace. She followed every rehabilitation plan with precision, never rushing, never cutting corners. Evan adapted more easily than Laura had expected. The Dawsons made space for him without question. He ate meals at a long wooden table, played outside in the afternoons, and slept through the night without waking from anxious dreams. The tension he had carried since leaving his mother eased, replaced by a sense of safety that Laura had feared she could no longer give him. Day by day, Abigail grew stronger. She learned to sit up again, then to stand with assistance. Laura worked patiently on fine motor skills, turning exercises into games, praising every effort no matter how small. When Abigail took her first independent steps across the living room, Patricia covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling freely. Laura simply knelt beside the girl, steady and calm, as if she had always known this moment would come. The Dawsons watched everything. They saw the discipline in Laura's routines and the gentleness in her voice. They noticed how she never treated her work as a favor or a burden, only as a responsibility she had chosen willingly. Trust grew naturally, without promises or conditions. Jonathan Dawson visited often, sometimes bringing medical equipment, sometimes just observing from a distance. As the owner of a private clinic, he recognized skill when he saw it. More importantly, he recognized integrity. Laura never spoke about what had happened at the hospital unless asked. She did not complain. She did not explain herself. She focused entirely on the work in front of her. One evening, as Abigail rested after therapy, Jonathan approached Laura in the quiet kitchen. "I've been watching how you work," he said. "Your assessments are sharp, your instincts are solid, and you don't lose your composure under pressure." Laura met his gaze, cautious but attentive. "I'm opening a position at my clinic," he continued. "Clinical care, patient-focused, the kind of work you're clearly built for. If you're interested, I'd like you to join us." The offer landed without drama. No rescue, no obligation, just recognition. Laura nodded slowly. "I'd like that." As the days passed, the future no longer felt like an empty space. It felt possible. Laura did not rebuild her life with noise or defiance. She rebuilt it through consistency, through quiet competence, through choosing to move forward even when bitterness would have been easier. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, hope returned, not loudly but firmly and on her own terms. The legal ground beneath Laura Bennett's feet stabilized slowly, not through dramatic victories, but through careful, methodical steps. With steady income secured and documented caregiving work behind her, the imbalance that had once threatened her place in family court began to correct itself. The assumptions that had worked against her lost their weight. Her footing returned, firm enough to stand on without fear. Mark's messages became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. The confidence he once wielded so casually faded as his leverage disappeared. Without control over Laura's career, without the ability to frame her as unreliable or unstable, his threats dissolved into silence. Whatever power he believed he had held over her life no longer reached her. Laura accepted Jonathan Dawson's offer and returned to medicine on her own terms. The clinic was smaller, more focused, stripped of the politics that had once consumed her days. She worked with patients directly again, hand steady, mind clear. There were no whispers about her past, no questions she felt compelled to answer. Her competence spoke for itself. Dignity returned not as a reward, but as a constant she carried with her. Time passed, and with it came something quieter and more deliberate. A connection formed between Laura and Jonathan, built slowly and without expectation. There was no urgency, no sense of being rescued or owed. They spoke as equals, respected each other's boundaries, and allowed trust to grow without pressure. Whatever developed between them did so naturally, rooted in shared values rather than shared wounds. Looking back, Laura did not measure survival by what she had regained, but by what she had refused to become. She had not lashed out. She had not destroyed in order to be seen as whole again. She had endured humiliation, betrayal, and loss without surrendering her sense of self. In choosing restraint, she had chosen clarity. Power, she learned, could erase reputations with alarming ease. It could twist narratives and silence truth for a time. But it could not erase truth entirely. Not when it was lived every day through action and integrity. She learned that silence, when chosen deliberately, could be stronger than retaliation. That stepping away from cruelty did not mean accepting it. And that healing did not begin with justice delivered loudly, but with self-respect reclaimed quietly. Laura Bennett survived, not because she fought harder than others, but because she refused to abandon who she was when everything tried to take it from her. And now the story turns outward. If you've listened this far, consider what this story leaves you with. Where would you have drawn the line? How do you define justice when revenge is possible, but dignity matters more? And what does resilience look like when it has no audience? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective may be the quiet strength someone else needs to hear.